year.
It took us till 2025.
Wait till you have kids, man.
I'm sure.
Bro,
Kids and running a gym and having
Kids
a
running it.
full-time job on top of all of it. It's hard to
Exactly.
find.
And 2 pugs.
Any two pugs, 2 cats, 7 chickens. So
How are what's the egg production like these days? Is it pretty low in the
not
winter?
great right now.
Okay.
No, they're not putting out very much.
We're
right
down
now.
to
Too cold.
we're down to 1 egg omelets, huh?
Right. Yeah, and then it's frozen too by the time you get to it. So.
Refrigerated.
Mhm.
I've been curious to pick your brain for a long time about the differences between people who compete in fight sports versus other types of athletic competitions.
Mm. Yeah.
What does it take to get in there in the ring with someone who's trying to beat you? Sorry, not beat you up.
Yeah, and you're asking like when you say fight sports, do you include like wrestling?
I think that
Include
has to be
jiu-jitsu?
in there. I think that has to be in there. I think I'm particularly interested in the striking aspect
Yeah.
as well. And you're one of the few guys here at our gym who have actually done competitive striking,
Yeah.
or at least competitions with competitive striking.
Mhm.
And it does seem like there's just something that's an extra layer of intensity if someone's just trying to hit you in the face.
Yeah, and I mean, I think just the difference between like transitioning to like MMA from jiu-jitsu, which I think they're so seem so closely related, and I mean the the whole idea of MMA came out of like the Gracies'
Hmm.
desire to prove how effective jiu-jitsu was. But what I found is like it's once you start hitting, right? And
Hmm.
Tyson has that quote about everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth or whatever. But it is really like quite true of like when once you actually get hit,
Hmm.
like it completely changes everything. And so you can have guys who are just like killers on the mat when it comes to jujitsu rules. And then the moment you start adding like striking to it, it can all just like fall apart for them.
Hmm.
And I remember I was training down in Fort Collins. We had this guy, he was a brown belt, and he was way better at jujitsu than me. Like he would just wipe the floor with me every single time we
Every
rolled.
time
I
you
think I was a
rolled.
purple belt at the time.
Uh-huh.
And like there were brown belts that I could be pretty competitive with. He was not one of them. He was on a different level with
Hmm.
his jujitsu game, and then he wanted to train MMA. And I remember we put on the like not the little gloves, but like the 7 ounce ones that are MMA size, but have like a little extra padding so you can like properly spar with them.
Uh-huh.
And it completely flipped. Like the moment I could start hitting him,
Mm.
like all of a sudden, like the roles completely reversed, and I felt like I was in, and I'm not. I've had one MMA fight is all I've ever done. I've
Mm.
just kind of trained it outside of like the couple months I put in before the fight that I did. It
Hmm.
was all just kind of like casual training of like we'd spar here and there and we do things like that. And I trained some Muay Thai on top of jiu-jitsu as well as some traditional boxing, but I don't have this like really like super deep experience with striking. It's just like I think I had been punched a few times in a grappling scenario, and he had not.
Sure.
He had not experienced that really yet.
Uh-huh.
And I will say it didn't take him too long to kind of turn everything kind of back around. Like, but the first few times that you get punched and it is really eye opening. And then there's another, and that's on like
Or
the
eye shutting.
training. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's on like the training level. And then there's a whole nother level, like when you actually go to like fight somebody and get punched.
Yep.
Like I trained pretty hard for that MMA fight that I did, and you know, we did a lot of like pretty hard striking. We did all sorts of like trying to prepare for different scenarios and things like that.
Hmm.
But when they rang that bell and we came out and like I don't even the only thing I remember about it is I remember how it felt when and all he did was hit me with like a good stiff jab. And I remember just like essentially blacking out. And the next thing I like full have a full memory of is I had him on the cage on the ground. Like it had basically been like a button that like I did not like how it felt, and it immediately put me into like I'm going to wrestle and get him down.
Mm.
And um and then even within that fight after that first one, once my head had kind of cleared a little bit and it was kind of over the shock, then there were a couple exchanges where like I took, a couple of punches, not anything super bad, but like they didn't have the same, you know, shock value that very first one did. But like that very first real punch in an MMA fight that I took, like immediately, like just flipped a switch where I literally there's about probably 3 to 5 seconds of that fight that I just didn't even have a memory of, and had to go kind of watch the video after to see that I just immediately went for a double leg into the fence. But it's interesting because I think that once you start adding that like more, I don't know, primal, I guess is the word, thing of striking into it, it does really, really change things. And I do think there's like a different kind of person that wants that, right? Like most people, I don't think want anything to do with getting hit in the face. Lots of people want to hit people in the face and think that they
Would be good at
very
it.
good at it, no matter their lack of training of any sort. But nobody wants to get hit in the face, and to be in a striking art, like you just have to be willing to get hit in the face. And you'll watch these guys in like the UFC and stuff, and they'll take 5, 6 shots, and they'll just keep coming and keep coming, right? And not a whole lot of people are built like that. And I think that is the big difference between not only between, striking arts and like jujitsu and wrestling, but also I think a huge difference between like, fight sports and other sports, right? Like you hit people in football, but like you get pads on, nobody ever really gets hit in the face, right? And, and it's always almost in a pretty controlled way. And then like most other sports, you're just not allowed to hit at all.
Right.
You bump somebody too hard in basketball or soccer or whatever, they're on the floor.
Yep.
Writhing in pain. And then you watch these guys in MMA fights get tagged. Max Holloway will get tagged 6 times in a row on the chin, and he just keeps coming. But you touch, Neymar
Right.
in the wrong part of his calf, and he's,
He's rolled on the ground, yeah,
for the next 45 seconds.
Have you seen that video of it's like a bunch of 6-year-olds practicing, and they're running a bunch of drills? It's like, all right, everyone do your crossover dribble. All right, everyone do your attack dribble. And so all these kids are running around, and then the coach yells, Neymar! And simultaneously all the kids fall to the ground
I have not
and start rolling around in
pretty good.
in mock pain.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fun.
Or Neymar.
Yeah, poor Neymar. Yeah.
He's a victim of the sport.
He's well, so speaking of victims of the sport, I mean that's a great segue because I've gotten to the point. I'll go to a couple fight nights, that people host. We've hosted some at the gym. Taylor's have hosted some. Man, I'm getting kind of the point where I can't watch guys just get the pulp beat into them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how you're feeling about that stuff, but I guess I've just been reading too many of these stories of these guys like post career. It's like it's almost like they have MS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel exactly the way you do, and like I feel it a lot with like I don't enjoy football like the way I used to. Like,
Oh, interesting.
Love football, and yeah, it does just bring like a little like once like the consequences of that giant hit, blindside on the quarterback or wide receiver coming across the middle or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have the same like I don't know, I don't get amped up about it. I used to be like, oh yeah, like get really excited about somebody landing a big hit. But now like there's always that like, oh, I hope that guy's going to be okay now and going to be okay when he's 45 and all his football money is run out. And does he still have the, mental wherewithal to support his family and live a good life and not,
well,
God forbid, commit suicide, like which just happens to so many of them. And like I think, football is obviously a really bad one. I think I I'm not aware that we've seen a ton of it in MMA. I don't
Okay.
know of I'm not aware of any MMA fighters that we've it's kind of come out that CTE has been like
Really? I thought
a
GSP
thing.
was sort of considered uh Georgia St. Pierre. I thought that people were saying a couple years ago that yeah, his fine motor skills
Right.
basically gone.
I guess what I mean is like I don't think MMA has experienced that like tragic one yet of
Okay.
like so and so died at 42
Hmm.
because they had traumatic brain injury or whatever, you know.
Hmm.
Whereas you had countless football players at this point you can
Hmm.
look at. Like I think the one that I always think about is Junior Seau that committed suicide and he had huge amounts of CTE.
Uh-huh.
And the place you see it, I think, way more than even football is professional wrestling. Professional wrestling is like most of those guys are lucky if they make it to 60.
I've read that.
Like, I don't know how Hulk Hogan's still here. Like, he's one of the few. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge list of them and some of it too, I think, and yeah, I guess you have this in other sports too, but there's huge, drug problems
Huge drug
in
problem. And then
professional wrestling
right,
too,
there's recreational drug problems. There's also
and
doping
steroids.
and
Yeah.
the doping.
Yep.
Right. And
And
it's
it
always
was just
social.
flat out not only encouraged, but I think there were times when in professional wrestling's history where like if you weren't doping, you probably weren't on the show.
Performing.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, how could you be?
Right.
Like, right? Like you're gonna
Hmm.
get out there and you look only half as good as the
Right.
other guys in the
Hmm.
cage.
Yep.
These other guys are like 270, you're 210. People don't want to see
Yeah.
that. Right?
Hmm.
Yeah, you might be the fittest man on the planet, but yeah, compared to that giant on the other
Hmm.
side of the cage, it just doesn't have the showmanship
Right.
elements that
Hmm.
you're looking for
Yeah.
if you're Vince
Well, and then they
Vince
also
McMahon, who runs professional.
Well, it was Vince McMahon. He doesn't run it anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole Netflix series on it. It's a really interesting watch, even if you
Okay.
don't like never been interested in professional wrestling, but like they go into the whole steroid. Like there was a whole trial in the 90s of
Oh,
where I can't remember what the exact outcome was, but like they were on trial for that Vince was not only encouraging steroid use, but
hmm.
also like peddling
Yep.
and facilitating like the distribution of it and things like that. And so
Oh, geez. I didn't know any of
and
this.
then there's also and now he's also a part of like
Send me your
multiple
logins.
yeah, right. Well, and I just heard the price went up too on
Mm.
Netflix. They're increasing the price again. But yeah, they
Ah,
they ran him out though because now he's also embroiled in like multiple sex scandals and
of course.
other things. So
Yeah, they always are.
yes, but his daughter and son-in-law are still running. So
Yeah. What a funny thing for our culture. Yeah, just mock gladiatorial combat. I guess it's better than real gladiatorial combat,
for
I
sure,
suppose.
yeah.
So, but
And
yeah.
I still love professional wrestling.
No
I
way.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Hmm.
What?
What's not to love? They're fighting.
Uh-huh.
They're fighting over
So
lots of different things.
lots of different things, perceived insults.
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
There's
Or
right.
real
There's a whole
insults,
there or real insults.
Yeah. It's like it's like football, but like they actually like work on like the trash talk
Uh-huh.
beforehand,
Right. Right.
and
It's like stand up
and it's like
combined with
and it's like it's and they've got it to where like you know it's always a pretty good football game. You know, it's
Mhm.
never just like a blow. Well, unless there are times when they have what they call squash matches where one guy will just win in like 45 seconds to show their dominance or whatever. But
right.
and I've heard people call it like the men's soap opera or whatever, which is not far from the truth also, right? Like it's all these storylines going on and all this stuff.
Men's soap opera.
And I was thinking about it the other day, and it it's what brought me to jujitsu. Like I remember, like I loved professional wrestling. It was a huge thing when I was a kid, in like my friend group and everything. And it was like we lived like our little small generation lived through probably the greatest era of professional wrestling when WCW was actually competitive with the WWF, WWE now, and they had these awesome storylines that they called the NWO that came into the WCW, and they pretended like they were guys from the WWF because they had bought them from the WWF. They've signed them away, but instead of you didn't have that information back then,
Right.
and so they just had them in the crowd, and they're like, "Who are these guys? Why are they here?" And it was this like you couldn't tell if it was real or fake, and that's where, like at this age, where it's sports entertainment, right? You know it's not, the matches are predetermined,
Yep.
it's choreographed, all that, but they still, even to this day, do a pretty damn good job of like straddling that line of like, because they do often, there's often real stuff that there's real beef that happens within it that sometimes is real. What they call shoot is the professional wrestling term for it. Like a shoot is when it's not, you're just going off the cuff and it's not the scripted part. You're doing what, and sometimes, and like, so like, if you're like shoot punching somebody, they're actually punching them. And like Brock Lesnar's a pretty famous person for really enjoying some real punches in the ring, obviously.
Right.
And then
because he's also competed in MMA.
right. And then there's what they call works, which are it's totally everybody's in on it, right?
Okay.
And then but then there's a gray area too of like sometimes you're not sure if it is a work or if it is a shoot, and sometimes it is a little of both, and it's interesting. I definitely don't watch it near as much as I used to. Like as a kid, I was literally flipping between, Monday Night Raw and Monday Nitro on Monday nights. As a kid, I was going back and forth between USA and TNT because they were running at the same time, competing against each other at that time. I don't do that anymore. Like I don't even keep up with like the big. They're not. I guess they're also not pay-per-views anymore. So I can't remember what they call them, live events or something like
live
that.
streams or something.
But I'll tune in for WrestleMania every year and the Royal Rumble, and like every now and then I'll get
out.
Yeah,
No way.
and it is what got me to jujitsu too, because like going into junior high and then high school, it's not very cool. Like professional wrestling, right? And so it kind of fell off, and my whole friend group, we all kind of stopped watching it as much, or if at all. But kind of right around that same time, The Ultimate Fighter came out, and it was this really close, it was this show this was basically real wrestling, real professional wrestling, where they're actually fighting each other. And on top of it, right in the heyday of reality television, they also threw a reality show on top of the guys fighting each other for real. And that became a really big thing for I think a lot of kids my age at that time.
Right.
And we got really into it. And I know a lot of people like that Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner fight is kind of it's one of those moments in MMA history. It's basically the like launch point for the UFC of really taking off.
This is when it came on the scene and entered the
Yep, it was live on cable TV, not on pay-per-view. All the other UFC fights had been on pay-per-view up to that point. They did this on I think it was Spike TV at the time is what I think it was called. And and these guys just went to frickin' war with each other for 3 rounds. Awesome fight, and a ton of people saw it, or they told their friends about it later. And lucky for the UFC, like Spike TV was a channel with not a ton of programming, so they're going to run that. They're going to run that again, maybe next week or 2 weeks from now. And so people got to see it again. It really kind of catapulted the UFC into to become what it is today. But we were watching that reality show before that fight happened, and so for my friend group at that time, it had already kind of grabbed us.
Right.
And I remember as a kid, when I would get into like the wrestling video games and stuff, I would always have guys who at least one of their finishers was some kind of submission hold. Like usually an ankle lock, which is It's an actual just toe hold. It is a toe hold in jujitsu, like that,
Hmm.
and they do it in a much more demonstrative way, and like they're obviously taking care of the guy, but you can see how a toe hold would look really freaking gnarly
Hmm.
in like really like, you know, giving everything you got onto it, but not really ever
Right.
putting it in a super compromised position.
Right.
And so a lot of my like created wrestlers and stuff would have that. And so something about me early on like loved the idea of submissions. And then I found this sport, you know, a few years after I'd stopped watching wrestling where, oh my, you're just, these are real submissions. They're not just like choreographed ones. These are real ones that work for real. And unfortunately, at that time for me, there was lit. When I say there was literally nothing in Wyoming, there was nothing in Wyoming. There was no jujitsu anywhere. And so there was no option to even learn it. Like I didn't even, and I think at that time that probably hadn't even crossed my mind because I'd never even heard of a Brazilian Jiu Jistu gym. It was something that like, you know, they do in the big cities or whatever. And then I came back to it in college. Like I think it was my sophomore year. Like I came back and I was like, I remember really enjoying The Ultimate Fighter, that first season of The Ultimate Fighter, and we had watched a few UFC fights too, and then I remember thinking, you know what I should do? I should. This was in the heyday of like LimeWire. Were you old enough for LimeWire and Kazaa and like these? There were these.
I think I'm old enough. Was I too sheltered?
Maybe. So these file sharing services
Hmm.
that you could just download anything, and you could download just like, you know, InSync's latest CD, so you didn't have to go buy it, or you could download like real hardcore stuff too. And and so I found every single UFC there was and downloaded as many of them as my hard drive would take. And I
Yep.
started from one and just worked my way through. And I remember being like, holy crap, this Hoist Gracie dude just like destroyed everybody in the first one. And he came back. He destroyed everybody in the second one. And he came back for the third one and got hurt. But kind of looked like he was going to destroy everybody there too. And he came back for the fourth one, destroyed everybody in that one, including guys who were outweighed him by close to 100 pounds. And I remember being like, oh, I gotta learn this. And so I started looking and trying to find where's the nearest jujitsu place. And Google told me it was Boulder, and I'm in Laramie. And that's like, I think it's close to a 2 hour drive. And I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out how can I get to Boulder once or twice a week? Like, how can I make a 2 hour drive work? And as I was like trying to logistically figure that out, the McMahon Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Fort Collins opened, and it was like, only an hour? I only have to drive an hour? This is easy. And yeah, and then that my brother and I went to their grand opening. We got, you know, they had the whole like you get a gi. We're signing up for 2 months or 3 months or whatever. And yeah, and we both started and basically essentially never looked back.
Hmm.
And it's interesting too, because like we would have people and they're like, oh, you're driving all the way from Laramie or you're driving all the way from Cheyenne. I remember being like, dude, I was going to drive to Boulder. Like, this is way better. But and they live in Fort Collins. They're 5, 10 minutes away from the gym. But yeah, you know, we have some of those guys now, right? We got guys coming from Riverton. We got
Or yeah,
guys.
we got people coming over from Jeffrey City
Yep.
for kickboxing.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
If you wanted enough,
If you wanted enough, you make it happen.
Yep. Hmm.
Very true. Yeah. No, I remember my first days of driving an hour just to get to
Hmm.
a class. And yeah, it was like a kickbox. It was a kickboxing for fitness, right? It was one of
Hmm.
those I love kickboxing franchises, but they had this like twice a week. They had this little
Oh,
jiu-jitsu program, right? And it was probably like 6 people. I mean, it was the tiniest little filament of the jiu-jitsu world
right.
that I found. And then and there was this boxing gym. Again, I mean, honestly, this was like 2012, 2013. So it wasn't like it wasn't in the dark days of
Yeah,
jiu-jitsu in
like
the
I started in
US.
2007,
Right,
right? And
right.
like there was literally nothing in Wyoming. There was literally nothing in Wyoming for a long time
Sure.
after that too. Like I drove to Fort Collins for 13 years.
Uh-huh.
But the last couple of those years, I did have options in Cheyenne, but it wasn't till really the last probably like 3, maybe 5 years, there were actual real options in
Like
Cheyenne.
real options, not like
Like,
some guy's dank spidery
well, I did that
basement.
too. I did that too. So 2009, I graduated, got a job, but it was more expensive for me to pay for gas to get to Fort Collins than it was to pay for the tuition for the gym. And so I'm paying more to drive there than I am to actually train.
Sure.
And so, and training's not cheap. And that gas wasn't cheap. And so I started to like, I was like, I got to find something to do here so that I can like just get some rolls in. So I can maybe, instead of going like, cause I was going like 3 to 4 times a week. And, um, and so I was like, I got to find something. Maybe I can go once or twice a week and then find some people who will do something with me up here.
Right.
My brother and I exhausted every option there was. We went to every single like martial arts gym there was, and there was some places that were having like an MMA class, and it was just like complete garbage. Like the techniques were terrible. Like they didn't really actually teach. Like I remember we spent the first 30 minutes just doing a circuit. And so they had like a dummy they'd put on the ground and you'd put your gloves on and you just get on top of the dummy and punch him. And then there was like a bag and some guy was trying to do like 540 kicks on the bag and stuff and crap like that. And then 30 minutes in, they'd bring you in and they showed us this like leg lock that was completely fictitious. It was not ever going to work. And I remember just being like, what on earth? And you can probably imagine too. It was like, okay, go try that. People went and did it 3 times. Okay, let's roll. And it was like, nobody cares about technique here. Nobody cares about actually learning the actual art of it. They just want to train.
Right.
They just want to
Right.
get
They
in
want to
and
break a
hit
sweat.
things and think they know what they're doing. And me and my brother went in there and we're looking around. Nobody comes up to roll with us. So we're like, all right, I guess we'll roll with each other. And so we start rolling with each other. And this is not an exaggeration. 3 minutes in, I think I'm in guard or something. I like look around. Nobody's doing anything else. They've all stopped and they're watching us. And we were like mid-level white belts at that time. Like we were not, I know we were not doing anything that should have garnered that much attention, but it did. And I remember just being like, yeah, that's all that Cheyenne has right now is people who want to say they know what they're doing, but nobody who wants to put in the work to actually learn
Hmm.
how to do the things. And I
Huh.
did,
People were watching you because
yeah, they all just
even
stopped rolling to watch our roll.
they didn't have any experience of someone actually rolling. People
Right.
just sort of flailed around with
Right.
each
I'm
other.
sure there were guys who like bigger, faster, or just more aggressive, and they would like get on top of another guy, and then that would be pretty much the end of the roll, right? They'd probably spend the rest of the roll in that position. But like my brother and I at that time were pretty evenly matched. I mean, we're similar size, similar build, and had basically the exact same experience level. And so it was probably a pretty competitive role, which maybe that's what it was. I don't know. I can't imagine. I don't know. It still sticks with me though. I'm like, what? I don't know what we did that could have possibly made them all stop, but they did, and it was weird. And
Probably
I never went back.
Probably a sweep
Some
or
kind of
something.
sweep that they were like, what the hell did
What
he
the
just
hell?
do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a wizard.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I did meet 3 guys that were training in this guy's garage, and his name is Bobby Ryan, Professor Bobby Ryan now, and he was trying to run some cage fights. So he had a guy weld together a big old hexagon cage for him out of just like, you know, not the world's best metal or welding job, but like he got a whole cage put together And he had like the mats from the cage in his garage, and he was just kind of rolling with some people, and he had started doing a Gracie garage. So he would bottle the lessons online, and he was trying to get his blue belt through Gracie University. And at that time, I already had my blue belt, but I was like, people to train with that aren't at the crappy, I can't remember if it was karate or taekwondo or one of those traditional martial arts that has become far too commercialized. And that was the other gym. And I was like, it's not that.
Yep.
It's at least people who want to learn jujitsu.
Sure.
And so yeah, I started training with him and two other guys who were real committed. We'd have lots of people come in and out and not last for very long. But there were four of us who we went through the whole thing. We went through all of the, I think they call it combatives now on their website, the Gracie combatives. We went through the whole curriculum. We videotaped ourselves. We sent the videos in. We all got scored and graded, and we all ended up at the end of it with Gracie University blue belts. And so I had two different blue belts. I had my one with the little McMahon tag on it and my one with the little Gracie tag on it. And still got the Gracie one somewhere that I don't think I've ever actually worn it. But yeah, and the funny thing is, all four of us now are black belts.
Oh,
All four of us, just these four random assortment of dudes. And I went to high school with two of them, and wasn't really. I was like acquaintances with. Well, I was acquaintances with James Raleigh, and then the other guy's name is Matt Kano. He was way too scary for me in high school. Like he would like he got into like real fights and stuff, and I was like, I don't want to mess with that guy. But yeah, all four of us have our black belts now, and from four different places, and it's kind of crazy that this little group of us that rolled in this. I remember it'd be so cold in that garage during this time of year that we would get there a little early and we would just shuffle our feet all around the mat for like 15 minutes just to hopefully get the mats so that they weren't just
Warmed
ice
up.
cold
Right.
and your feet were of course numb then
Yep.
by the end of it because they were freezing now.
Yep.
But yeah, all four of us are now black belts. It's
That's awesome.
kind of crazy.
That is. Yeah. I'm curious about that. Do you know why Taekwondo and karate got so commercialized in the US? Was it like this big push after the stranger danger scare of I think that was the 90s. So like,
Yeah.
okay, your kids need to be supervised. We also like maybe they need to learn some skills. So there was this huge rush to the market. Like what happened? Do you know?
I don't know for sure. I'm sure it probably is like a combination of things, right? I think for
Always is.
Taekwondo specifically,
Mm-hmm.
I know the Olympic rule set has not helped at all, and judo's is in a similar situation where like these are the rules for the Olympics, and so like and then you have these like most of the good schools are going to then train for the Olympic rule set because they have people who may or may not be Olympic hopefuls or at least want to compete. And most of the competitions are going to follow the Olympic rule set because that's where hopefully it's all leading. And
That's
so
how you
like,
can channel people up.
right. And so like in judo, even like, they're starting to move, kind of the wheels are turning on allowing leg grabs back into judo. But for a very long time up till now, you're not allowed to grab the legs. And so there's a whole bunch of judo throws that were just illegal. Like you just couldn't do them. Like a double leg takedown. It's called Marote Gari in judo, and it's just illegal
Yep.
in judo competition.
Yep.
And like the kataguruma that we do, the fireman's carry, like they're still doing it with even though it's illegal to grab the legs, but they've had to like modify it significantly so that you're doing it without actually touching the leg
Grabbing
with
a
your hand.
leg. So you're right. You go for the high crotch and your hand is up on his
Right.
hip or something.
And you can see from that the slippery slope that creates of like suddenly it's no longer fighting. It's just we're doing this thing to this rule set. And like Taekwondo is a lot about point sparring where like you just have to touch. Like you basically just have to touch him in the chest or touch him in the head. And like I'm sure most of these guys could if they really wanted to, like, really kick your head off. But that's not what they're training for. they're training to be able to get around somebody's, guard or get to them quick enough and just be able to, tap them with enough force that they score points for it. And now it's just point sparring instead of actual like looking at real, self-defense type scenarios. And I think another thing besides the Olympic rule set though is probably things like Karate Kid. You get this huge influx of kids who now want to train karate.
Hmm.
And so, you know, the the guys who are good businessmen, along with being karate black belts or whatever, are finding ways to like capitalize on that. How do we keep this many kids in here? How do we keep, and that's where I think all these excessive belts systems come in too of like, well, how do we keep them coming? Well, they just got to get it to the next belt. And so like if there's only 5 belts like there is in jujitsu, that's a long time between each belt.
Sure.
A lot of people fall off, right? There's a big gap between blue and purple belt in jujitsu. Where do we see the most attrition? At blue. As soon as guys get their blue belt, you like more than half of them disappear and never come back.
You remember that joke back during the pandemic when people were saying, "How do we get rid of the pandemic?" Oh, just give it a blue belt. That'll make it
Right,
go
yeah,
away.
it'll go away. Yeah. And so I think that probably has watered it down over time too. And I think too, there's just a watering down that happens as you get more and more black belts. Like I don't know that you always have the same level of skill and knowledge. Like once it gets too wide, I'm not sure how you keep, the standards as high.
Right. How do you do that? Huh. You're right. And I guess wherever there's some money to be made, you run the danger of making it commercially accessible, right? So,
Right.
yeah, Karate Kid comes out, it's super popular, a bunch of kids wants to do it. You realize,
Mhm.
well, I could just hang a sign with some Japanese or Chinese or Korean symbols. None of these
Yeah.
Americans are going to
They're not
know.
going to know the
I'll
difference.
just hang that at a strip
Hang a
mall.
sign that has all three, little
Right.
mixture of all three.
Right. Right. People will come,
Right.
but I can't be sending kids home with black eyes or big
Right.
bruises
They won't come back.
or
Yeah.
yeah, bruised up feet. So yeah.
That was our problem with the adult program early on was it was very judo heavy, and judo is not an adult friendly sport. Like to get to where you can really train judo, you have to have done, 6 months of break falls, right? Like you can't be and people aren't just going to come in to class to break fall either. Like they want to throw somebody. Well, I remember when I got here, that was kind of our thing is we'd get a few people interested. They'd come to a couple classes. Marcio would do a pretty good job of like, this is gonna be mostly break fall heavy, and we'd get a ton of break fall. But then the first day we actually started actually throwing, you'd get like half of them that wouldn't come back. And maybe they'd come back after a week or two after they
Really,
weren't
it was
so
the
sore.
the first series of throws that got people to quit.
Right, because
They
like
weren't getting bored doing break falls.
no,
They were getting
because your body, like
intimidated.
that jarring of your body of like falling. And I feel really fortunate that like in jujitsu we had done enough front rolls and break falls and things early on that like when I came here it was like no big deal. Like I'm used to taking some decent falls and feel moderately competent at it. I definitely wasn't as competent as I probably thought I was, um but I wouldn't get hurt from falling.
Hmm.
Whereas these people who've never trained anything and then all of a sudden you go to throw them,
Yep.
it's a lot. And we didn't have a bunch of crash pads at that time. And we were on the armory floor
Yep.
and we're just like, on these old mats too,
Yeah.
not these nice new mats that we have, these like old wrestling mats that Marcio had gotten from who knows, probably Lander or Riverton or somebody who was throwing out their old mats because they just got new ones. And yeah. And so we would have, I remember it like pretty vividly. I'd be like, oh, we got like 4 people today. This is 4 adults. This is going to be awesome. And then like we'd have them for a couple days or whatever. And then they'd throw. And then it's me and Marcio, the next class. And
Right.
That's all that's there.
Eh.
And Brian will
on.
tell you too. Brian suffered a couple of big throws early on that almost, I think, from what he's told me, almost like did him in. And like early on, I remember he would be in and out, like not like he is now, where like he's got a life, so he's in and out, but like it was like we would not see him for like weeks and weeks, and then he'd be back. And come to find out, like part of it was because like maybe he took a big throw from Marcio or something, and he was just like,
Yeah, my
I'm
hips
not
not
doing. I don't feel like doing that again for a while.
right.
You know?
Yep. Yeah, it's hard. It's disorienting to be up ass over tea kettle. So it's disorienting.
Yep.
And then, yeah, if you get a good throw, even on, in our mat setup is ideal today, right? And we've
Yeah.
got good mats on top of a sprung floor. And even if you still get a good throw, it'll knock the wind out of you.
For sure.
So it's disorienting and stressful to your chest cavity. That
Mhm.
happens a few times. I can see saying,
Kyle
maybe
knocked the
this
wind
isn't
out
for
of me the
me.
other night on a demonstration throw. Like he
Hmm.
just hit it and hit it perfect, and it took me over. I rotated more than I thought I was gonna, and
Hmm.
knocked the wind out of me a little bit.
Right. Right. Yeah, when guys are about to throw me, I just really try to think about staying loose, just loose, just sort of ready for wherever.
Right.
Uh, Stay loose, go up, and then really try to sprawl out and spread the impact.
Right.
But that's after years of break falls and being thrown that, yeah, I can sort of put myself in that mental space of thinking the more I relax and the less I think about the throw, honestly, the better off I'll be when I'm being thrown, right?
Yeah.
And that's only after many, many
Yeah.
instances of being attacked in that way. And it's just a mock attack.
Because that's now your instinct now, right? You've now trained yourself so that the instinct when you get thrown is to break fall. Where
Hmm.
early on,
Yeah.
people's instinct is to reach for the floor,
Yep.
try to like
Go to the
go
fetal
face
position.
down, put their feet down, like things that are going to break limbs and
Yeah.
like just pop their head up. And like I remember we were doing that at Kataguruma a few weeks ago, and like
Mm.
we could not get people to like tuck their heads, and I was like really concerned somebody was just going to take a face full of mat and like have some kind of neck injury.
Ugh. Yeah.
And it's all just because like you don't want to roll over. Like that's such a foreign thing to like go onto your spine.
Yep.
But that's the safest way to
Mm.
get through that throw.
Hmm.
You don't want to face plant into the mat. But like you said, though, it takes forever. It takes
Yep.
forever to get it. And then once you do, you are better off just not thinking about it a lot of the
Right.
time.
Right.
Then you let your good instincts take over
Hmm.
and you don't overthink and mess it up. But
Right.
you got to get to that point first.
Takes a while for sure.
Break falls. So you're saying it's like when someone throws you, you just kind of let yourself fall.
Yes.
In a way, yeah.
That's part of it. But then
Yeah.
you're also spreading out so that like your arm and hand take some of the impact, your back and hips take some of the impact, maybe your feet take some of the impact. So it's like you kind of pancake, but then
Mhm.
also at all times your chin is tucked to your chest
Okay.
so that no matter what, ideally your head doesn't take any impact.
Yeah, you want to like lessen the impact of the throw as much as humanly possible. And you do that by one, increasing the amount of surface area that hits the mat, because then you're not taking it all in one place. And so, like what I was talking about earlier, when Kyle threw me, the problem was like I over rotated through the throw, and then I wasn't in good position to really spread it out. And so I took a lot more on like my rib cage than I typically would.
Mm.
And that's when you get like the wind knocked out of you.
Yep.
But also, you also want to make it as smooth as possible. Even when somebody's throwing you in like a fight or sparring situation, you want to make that fall as smooth as possible. And so you want to be kind of round. Like I want to like roll into whatever's about to happen. I don't want to like Marcio used to go and get the big old cardboard box out of the closet, and he would bring it out and you're like, you don't want to fall like this, and you drop it and you hear the big thump as like that flat thing hit. You want to roll like a ball, right? You want to roll and take a little bit on your shoulder, a little bit on your hip, a little bit. You don't want to take any part of you to take all of the fall. And so if you can spread it out by increasing the surface area and by increasing like basically the length, you're basically lengthening the amount of fall that you do.
Mm.
Because like my shoulder hits, a split second. If I'm rolling, my shoulder will hit a split second before my back, which is a split second before my hips, which is a split second before. And so instead of taking it all at one time, we're taking it almost like a rocking chair.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're falling like a rocking chair. Just roll it through.
Mhm.
So what is you I'm thinking about the commercialization of martial arts again, and one of the taglines was take on opponents that are bigger than you, stronger than you, that whole sort of thing. I don't even know what I think about it, even after doing it for 12 years. I've grappled and done takedowns with guys who are much bigger than me, and I've been successful. On the other hand, I've not been in too many bar fights with
Yeah.
guys who are a lot bigger than me and
Yeah.
intend me harm. What's your take on the size factor when it comes to like real violence?
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing to talk about because I think there's some misconceptions around it of like that skill will always trump size, right? And that's definitely not true. Like you can find plenty of examples where the size difference was just too much, right? Like you can have, the best judo in the world and like you go against like it's that guy that played the mountain in Game of Thrones.
Mm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Borgensen?
Big, yeah.
Borgensen?
Like half Thor, right? Isn't his? Yeah.
Or Borgensen.
Yeah.
Mm.
Like I'm never going to be able to like properly throw that guy. That's not a realistic thing to think, right? And yeah, even if he's never trained jujitsu a day in his life, like there's limitations to all of it. But at the same time, like how often am I going to run into a guy that big, right?
Right.
And
Get into an altercation with him.
right, yeah, and keep myself in a position where one is a guy that big gonna even mess with. Like I think we think they would, but like somebody of that size, I think they probably get to a point where they're like, I don't need to. Like I'm big enough, I don't need to mess with people, right? I think there's kind of a middle ground of like they're kind of big, but they still have these insecurities and stuff. They're not like the biggest guy around, but they're bigger than you are, and so they're gonna prove that how big they are, that kind of thing. And I do think in most situations you can be successful there, assuming that you have enough training that you know you're at least mildly competent. Like I think like the Gracie's whole thing was like a blue belt should be able to defend themselves in a street fight, right? But I don't think a blue belt is probably knows enough to defend themselves against somebody who's significantly bigger than them in a street fight. Once you get to like purple belt, brown belt for sure, I think you should be able to. The size should matter a lot less, right? But then also, we're assuming that that guy has no experience in anything.
Sure.
If that guy's wrestled, you're in big trouble.
Uh-huh.
Like you're not getting that guy down. He's going to get on top of you, and then you're just going to get completely smashed, and then probably
Because he has
sent to the
enough to put
hospital.
his size back to use.
Right. He knows how to use his size a little bit. But kind of, I think the premise of the statement that you kind of started with that, size doesn't matter is that we're kind of assuming that like we have a level of skill. The bigger person does not have that skill. That level of skill should then win out. And I do think we have a lot of examples where that is true. Like you have the Gracie, all those Gracie, what are they called? The Gracie Challenge videos where they would bring in bodybuilders and giant dudes but also people from like Taekwondo and other martial arts to try to prove that that's how the UFC started, right? They had these Gracie Challenge videos. They'd bring these people in $10,000 or $5,000, or sometimes it was just the tape, right? Winner gets the tape and they get to keep it and show people that they, kick the other martial arts ass or whatever. And there's plenty of examples of guys, small dudes, just wiping the floor with big dudes. I mean, those first 4 UFCs are prime examples of that. Like they picked Hoist for a reason. He was the smallest. He was the least intimidating in terms of build. Like they could have put Hicks and Gracie in there and he would have it would have been none of those matches would have even been close, but he's stacked and he's got a bunch of jujitsu accomplishments on top of that, and so it wouldn't have been nearly as impressive as this like Hoist was. He was like 180 pounds, 176 pounds or something like that. He was pretty soft. He was probably the least intimidating of
he
the
was a little
entire
dad bod.
family. Right. Yeah. And then he just goes out and kicks all these guys' asses. And like I think I wrote it down. Like Ken Shamrock was like 225, so there's a 50-pound, almost 50-pound weight disadvantage. Remco Pardo was 260 pounds, so almost 100-pound disadvantage. Chemo was 235. Dan Severn in UFC 4 was 250 pounds. And then when he got out of the UFC, he fought Aki Bono, who was a sumo wrestler who was 500 pounds over in Pride, and finished him with a omoplata, and that's not, and that kind of I guess goes to maybe disprove the point I said earlier. Now, Hoyces at that time was pretty world class level of jiu-jitsu. Like I don't think he was winning world championships, but his skill level at that time was still pretty high in comparison to where things were at that time.
Yeah.
But I mean that does kind of go against what I said about if they know how to wrestle. Like he's a sumo wrestler, and he was able to beat him. But we're also in a rule set too. I think is also an important thing to talk about there too, is we're within the confines of the Pride rule set and not a street fight.
No, street fight to me always seems more intimidating. Sorry, I shouldn't say more intimidating. As intimidating in the fact that you're probably on a hard surface.
Yeah.
With a lot of hard corners around you, right?
Yeah.
Like you get knocked backwards, you catch like the corner of a cement stair. You know what I mean?
Yep,
And that could
I
really
do.
mess you up. Oh, I remember this was a little after college, and I was playing some poker with some guys, and one guy was just running his mouth. And so finally, I cleaned him out. I cleaned him out with like a four of a kind. He had like a full house or something. Anyway, so he's just running his mouth all night long about who's actually better than me and blah, blah, blah. So finally I said, you're really cruising for a bruising. And he's like, I'll wrestle you right here. I said, okay, fine, let's do it. And then he sort of backs off about it. He's like, well, I think there are kids sleeping upstairs. So anyway, so what ends up happening is we agree to, this was like probably like a Friday night, maybe a Saturday. And we agree we're going to fight Monday morning. So Monday morning shows up, and I like went to the place where we agreed to meet ahead of time because I wanted to know the terrain, right?
Scout it out.
I mean, it was as big of a factor for me because it was winter, so there was snow on the ground. So that actually made it a little softer, but I actually ended up using the ground as a weapon because he shows up, he rips his shirt off. And so then, like, whenever we were on the ground, I just held him against the snow.
Yeah.
I just held him against the snow, and it just took his energy out. So I showed up. The video is so goofy because I show up with a hat.
A video of it?
I don't have it. Like some random kid probably has it on his phone from like college, like 8 years ago. I got to track that down. But I show up in a hat, gloves, jacket, and like sweat. Like I'm ready for a snow day. We start wrestling, and as I heat up, I'm like stripping stuff off while wrestling him. So I'm doing this like low rent strip tease while holding this guy against the snow. And I just remember afterwards, people be like, "Dude, like you won," and I was like, "The ground won, right?
Yeah.
Like the snow won. Like that was as much of a factor." Oh.
That's funny. I remember I haven't ever been in a real fight since I started training. But I did have a guy, not quite as aggressively as your guy, but I did have a guy that was a friend of my wife's friend, and we were all over at her friend's house with just like three of us couples or whatever, and he was a big dude. He was like he was at least 6'5". He might have been bigger.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, man, you should come in and train. Like it would be great. And then and he was like, oh, maybe we'll see, we'll see. And then like we got, a little later in the night,
Hmm.
and suddenly he started like questioning. Like, I don't think you.
I
I was
think
like, ah,
right,
man,
right. All
I was
that
like,
martial
yeah, I
arts is
can't.
bullshit.
He's
Right.
like, you couldn't, nobody, like, you couldn't do it to me though, right? And I was like, well, I think I could. Like, I'm pretty sure I could. He's like, yeah, but like, it's like, and he had all these like, no, I don't think that would work, or I don't know that this wouldn't work. And I like tried to like explain it to him, and then finally he was like, no way, man, you got show me. And so like he got down, and I got on top, and he tried to just. It's funny because we just did this in class on Wednesday night. We tried to bench press me off of him,
Yep.
and so I swung around for CPR armbar.
Hmm.
And what was stupid about it now, like I would never take the bait after that. Like it was a good learning lesson for me was that like he had no idea what was coming. And so he had no idea how to like keep himself safe. And so like I swung around on the arm, and then he tried to like explode out
The
and
other
just
way.
popped his own arm.
Hmm.
And I remember feeling like crap after it. Um, but I mean, it did prove a point,
Sure.
but I also feel like I learned a super valuable lesson of like, I think, get a little sheltered in that, like, if I throw this armbar, the other person in the gym
Hmm.
knows how to receive an armbar and
Sure.
not hurt themselves,
Yep.
And that's not the case in the real world. Like, they'll do whatever. It's kind of like the break falling we were talking about earlier. They'll do whatever the hell their human instinct is to get out of it. And sometimes their human instinct is to maybe pop their own arm, not knowingly, but like, I'm just going to try to rip out of this. And it doesn't work when you have the other person's entire body attached to that one arm. You're not going to win that. And so, yeah, it's not quite as fun as yours
No,
story,
no, no,
but
don't worry. That's it,
it is another
it is interesting.
check of the box. If they don't know what they're doing and you do even a little,
Yeah.
the odds
Yeah.
start shifting in your favor. But
When
I
I was
think the
in my
same thing's true though, right? Like if they start, like I think Ryan's a prime example of this. It did not take him long to immediately become a problem for everybody, right? Like as soon as he started to get just a few techniques under his belt and just a few like, oh, I shouldn't do that. Then all of a sudden it was like, man, this guy's really hard to control, really hard to tap,
right.
really hard to do anything against. And now I find myself defending almost more than I am attacking anymore with him.
A guy who's 260 in training so much quicker becomes a problem than the guy
Right.
who's 160.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I guess my point was just that like it doesn't take long for the size to all of a sudden become the
Mm.
winning factor again.
Yep.
Like it's not like at black belt he's a blue belt. I should just be killing him all the time if you think about it that way, but that's not what happens, right? Like he's very good now. And the size is the size comes back into play now because he's got a level of competency in it that now it's harder to overcome that size,
Hmm.
I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, the size is just this constant question. I remember my brother asking me about it. He actually got kind of frustrated because he didn't feel like I was giving him a straight answer. He's like, well, could you beat a guy who's 6'5" and 240? I'm like, yeah, maybe. Right. Like, what are the other factors?
Right.
And, he's like, well, what about a guy your size? I'm like, well, a guy my size who's untrained who's unarmed and on fairly receiving ground in the sense of, you're on the lawn or you're on like, uh, you're not in a room with a bunch of hard surfaces. It's like, yeah, I think I can win.
Right.
But it was like this very limited claim that I was willing to make,
Yeah.
right? In a certain situation against another person who's basically my size and with a lack of training, I have a high degree of confidence in that very narrow field. And people want this. People want for you to say, yeah, I'm Jason Bourne now,
Yeah, right.
right?
Nobody can beat me now.
No one can beat me now. Right. I've trained for 10 years. I'm Jason Bourne. And at least I just cannot make that sweeping umbrella claim. And I think people want to hear something a little bit more convicted
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the abilities that martial arts gives you. And I feel like the more you do martial arts, the more cautious you are in making these big, wide-reaching claims,
Yeah.
right?
I definitely think that's true. I think the more you, I think that's just life, right? The more
Mm.
you see, the more you realize like it's not black and white,
No,
right?
no.
Like there's not just good and evil. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Lots
yeah.
of shades of gray.
Hmm.
And um it's that whole thing too of like when you're 18, you think you know everything
Yeah,
because you think you see things so black and white.
yeah,
And then what happens as you get older is you start to see the shades of gray and like you start to feel like 18 you think you know everything. By the time you're 30, you're pretty sure you know nothing, right? And it's because you just life has kind of shown you like the things that I think aren't always true. Like it's not always the case that, X equals X,
sure.
you know? And I do think though, I do feel pretty confident that against somebody who is untrained and is like a normal person,
Yeah,
you know, like they may be 6'5". So I have two friends who are, one is 6'5". He's kind of a more of like a string bean. I think he's like 210,
sure.
6'5", 210. And then I have a friend who's 6'7", and like, I don't know what he's at now, but I know there are times in his life that he's probably been 300 plus. He's a huge dude. And I remember they were both, my friend Nick, a lot less certain that he would just kick my ass in a fight. But he was always curious about it. Whereas my friend Andy, who's 6'7", he was certain that I would have no chance against him. And I still feel very certain. And experience has taught me that though, because like we've had like in Fort Collins, we would get big dudes sometimes who would come in and like it, when they didn't know what they were doing, it wasn't that big of a deal.
Mm.
Like if you let them get on top of you and like side control or something, yeah, you were for sure in trouble for a little bit. But you don't have to let
You
them
don't have
get
to let
on
them.
top of you.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, you're going to be the faster person in that situation too. And
Right.
you're gonna be able to run around to their back or whatever, scramble, create a scramble somehow, and you should win the scramble against a guy of that size. It, and so I feel pretty confident
Yep.
that you would be able to probably beat somebody who's
Handle a
if
significant
they don't know what they're
weight
doing.
weight change.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny. I was at a New Year's party one time. All my fights happen in the winter, apparently. I was at a New Year's party. So it's probably after midnight. This guy had definitely been drinking. I'd been drinking a little bit. And he was like, Wrench, I hear you do jujitsu. Is that like, is that like karate? I'm like, no, it's grappling. So it's closer to wrestling. And I start giving this academic response. He's like, let's fight. So he just grabs me and starts trying to drag me to the ground. And he was heavier than me. He was shorter, but much heavier.
Yeah.
And I just turn my hips and I just
Yep.
swing him around to the ground and I get him in case of Katami. And I just sit on top of him in the snow until he's ready to give up. And he's like, whoa. And it lasted like 10 seconds.
Right.
He's like, wow, that was something. What was funny though is later I hear from my brother down in DC. This guy goes down to do graduate school in DC. So he meets
Oh.
my brother and he's talking about this fight on New Year's. This
You pick a
fight on
fight with your brother?
Yeah, I picked a fight with your brother. I didn't know I didn't know an old man could have such skills. And I said, "Old man, I was 20 I
Still
was
talking crap.
I was 28 at the time, you know?" Yeah, I didn't realize 28-year-olds were
Right.
on the
We're
other
still,
side of the prime
yeah.
in the eyes of the 20-year-olds. It was funny. Yeah, the old man wrench. So,
I think too what you touched on there too is that like I don't think we ever really get to train real judo throws. Like because we're always going against somebody who is prepared
who's expecting
and
a judo
expecting
throw?
it and knows how to take the fall and knows how to like put their weight in the correct. Even the new people, we tell them to stand this way and like be ready for this thing, right? Versus somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're doing, and you all of a sudden turn your hips on them, they go flying a lot of times. And so I think that's an interesting thing too. I don't think there's a safe way to like replicate that.
Yeah.
To be like, let's just go find like 12 dudes at Lander Bar
Yeah,
and bring
go to
them in
Lander
and,
Bar.
like,
Right. Bring home some scalps.
yeah,
Right.
but
You want your judo promotion? You got to go create. You got to go to Lander Bar and
right,
throw 2 people.
right. But I think it like quickly becomes like judo throws are hard in the gym, right?
Uh-huh.
Like when people are aware that a judo throw might be coming, it's really hard to actually execute.
Hmm.
Versus, I think when you have some idiot aggressively coming at you or trying to pull you or whatever, I think that changes that game completely in your favor
Mm-hmm.
in terms of them overcommitting their weight one way or the other.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's true. A lot of people, honestly, they throw themselves, right?
Yeah.
They don't know where they're going. They're going to the ground. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's interesting. So, man. Okay, let's take a quick break. Yeah, if I ever have to write a Dexter episode, I think
Gonna be
a nail
nail gun
gun will
related.
be the weapon of choice for my Dexter episode. So, Pat, I was homeschooled.
Okay.
You went to public school,
Yep,
then you became a public school teacher,
correct.
and now you're a teacher to public school teachers. Is that accurate to say?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
I
Help
think
us
that's
out on
like
that
the
last part.
simplest like way to kind of explain my job.
Mhm.
Because like I'm not really an administrator. Like I think a principal is a really easy thing for people to understand what the job is. Superintendent, those kind of things. My official title is MTSS coordinator. MTSS stands for multi-tiered system of supports. Basically, my job is to try to make sure that we have, a systematic way to get the proper supports to all of our students throughout our school district. And so, and what I mean by that is like, whether it's like, reading interventions or like maybe some, behavior supports, things like that that kids are in need of, and making sure that we do it systematically so that we're not just kind of flying by the seat of our pants and thinking, well, I think this kid needs this thing, but having like systematic ways to not only give them the supports they need, but also to make sure that the supports we give them are actually working,
Hmm.
and then adjusting it and trying to help those kids like close the gap on whatever their the area they really need to, improve upon is. And with that comes like I'm helping teachers. I do some professional development. I do run meetings and stuff. Like my job's really like every single week it's something different. Like some weeks I won't have very much on my calendar at all, and I'll have a lot of time to like pull data and like look at things like that. And then there'll be other weeks where I am literally wall to wall with meetings and I have no time to do anything else. And so and then they're like this week was kind of an in-between week. Like the beginning of the week I didn't have a ton of things, but then this end of the week I've had both days, Thursday and Fridays, are both going to be just packed with meetings and things all day long. And so, yeah,
About a
that's
year,
my job.
that's your job. About a year ago, you and I had a really interesting conversation, but I think we were training on the mat, so we didn't have time to delve into it.
Right.
You were saying how you see a historical trend where public schools that I are doing more and more and more and more, both in the subjects they teach, but now that's also spilled over into basically social formation of students.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you just
yeah.
can you
So
just explain what the
yeah,
thoughts you have behind that?
I tried to find, there's a great video where a guy kind of walks you through, I think it's on like some DVD is actually why I think I was unable to find it, because I was hoping to find it and be able to like reference it. But he talks about like the evolution of public education in the framing it around like what are teachers actually responsible to do and asked to do. And so like early on, it was literally just teach these kids how to read. That was it, right? Like early public education was like, we just need to make sure that our populace is literate. and can read and just had basic reading. And in fact, and frankly, it wasn't the populace. It was like the wealthy people could
Right.
read, right? And then
Yeah, maybe the
eventually,
upper third, probably more like the
right,
upper quarter.
right. And then, somewhere along the line, someone decided that arithmetic was an important thing to also add. And so now we had reading and math as our two things
Reading,
that we were
writing, and
teaching.
arithmetic.
Yep. Then
Yeah.
writing came in. So we got reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then just slowly over the years, we've just heaped more on top, right? Now then we put in science. It is important for kids to learn about science. We have now science and social studies that are coming in because we want, citizens who understand how our country works and why we are the country that we are and history and all that kind of stuff. And then I wish I'd found the video so I could give you like timelines for these things, but then somewhere along the line we started adding things like, physical education and health. And then we can't neglect the arts. So now we got art and music and things
Band,
like that. And then
yeah.
now you got drama and debate. And then we somewhere along the line we decided that public education was the best place to educate kids on sex education. And now what you're seeing right now in in public school and probably I'm sure charter schools and private schools are probably dealing with this as well is we're seeing a gigantic increase in the need for kids social emotional learning. Like they we have lots of students who don't know how to deal with their feelings properly and how to express themselves properly and in appropriate ways. And
In a way that you don't think was true when you were a
no,
kid
so I
in your own
don't
public school system.
like that's hard to say, right? Because
Right.
you're a kid
You're a
watching
kid.
it.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different system back then. Like back then, like if a kid was a behavioral issue, a lot of times they would just get the boot, right? They might go to some school somewhere else. They might just get expelled. Um, but over time, what's happened is one expulsion does not work. Like it does not. There is not an effective way to address those problems, and suspension even less so. And so you're seeing that's what we call exclusionary discipline, where you're taking a kid and then you're removing them, you're excluding them from their education because they've had to be disciplined.
Less education for you.
Right. And there is
Does
like
sound weird.
yeah. And there is like that whole mindset of like, the greater of the
Protecting the herd.
right, yeah, versus the needs of the many versus needs of the
Needs of
few
few.
or whatever. But yeah, you're seeing there's been a movement over the past, couple decades to like really reduce the amount of exclusionary discipline. Frankly, it just doesn't work. It doesn't solve the problem.
It's not leading to the desired outcome in the suspended or excluded student.
Right. I
Right.
think the hope is that, right, you send them home for a couple days, they think about what they did, they come back and they don't do it again.
Uh-huh.
And that's doesn't tend to have a very good success rate. And on top of that, this kid now is now farther behind than they were when they got kicked out because now they've missed 3 days of school. And they now, as they come back, are now behind, which is going to be frustrating for them, which is going to probably, exacerbate their, behavioral concerns.
It's an added stressor.
Right. And so there's a big push right now for, schools to be, starting to like teach kids how to try to regulate their emotions and how to deal with when you have something hard happen. How do you deal with it and how do you come back from it and how do you deal with it in an appropriate way instead of, punching a wall or, running out of the classroom or whatever it might be that kids do when they get triggered in those ways. And so that's kind of the big one right now, but there's a whole bunch more things that I can't even think off the top of my head right now. Driver's education, like now we're getting into like career and technical education is a big push right now. And so we have like these welding classes and automotive classes, and coding classes and computer science
super
classes.
popular like 5, 6 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
So it was career prep, college prep, arts,
mhm,
sciences, math, reading, basic literature, foreign languages,
foreign
sports.
languages, yep.
I mean, it's everything.
It's
It's
everything,
the
yeah.
hub for everything.
Hmm.
But now, okay, that this is interesting. Now it's also social dynamics
Yep.
and emotional intelligence,
Right.
which I think even in the 90s was something people just assumed kids will just pick that up from each other.
Right.
All right.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you'll figure out how to make friends, and that will be an important thing to navigate as a child, but you will navigate it inside a peer group rather than having it monitored by adults.
Right. And if you couldn't figure it out, a lot of times you just get removed, right? And you'd go, there were a lot of different like behavioral schools that would be, we'd send the kids to that couldn't, keep their behaviors to the level that the school deemed was appropriate.
Is that a
And
bit of a cottage industry, these behavioral schools?
yeah, I don't even know, man. My assumption is that like they were probably run through the Department of Education would be my guess. But maybe they could also have been like privatized. I'm not sure.
I
And we do
remember.
still have some. Like
Hmm.
we have one. There's one in Hudson called Sunrise, but
Hmm.
like to the level that the behaviors have to get to now for a kid to qualify to go to a school like that is very high.
Gotcha.
Like before, it was just like, oh, they're disruptive every single day in class. Eventually, weed is just too much. We're just not going to deal with it anymore,
Hmm.
and you're out of here.
You'll be sent to see the sunrise.
Right. Yeah.
What's the alternative they're finding that's more beneficial to help kids with problems?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that. Uh, I'm not sure we've got a super great handle on that. Um, I think there are lots of like social emotional learning programs out there that will teach kids, and um, I think for the majority of the kids, it probably works pretty well. But we're not talking about them, and most of those kids probably would figure it out on their own anyway. Like we were saying, like just social cues and stuff that you pick up of like, oh, when I, act this way, my teacher gets a little testy. I probably shouldn't act that way anymore. Um, but in so what when we talk about my job, multi-tiered system of supports, the tiers are tier one is like all of our kids. And so in tier one, we're talking about every single kid. So like when you talk about that with like reading, you're talking about like in there just like regular reading class. All the kids get the same, they all get the same curriculum. And so for like social emotional, you might give, a tier one, like just like a program that like talks about like, okay, when you have a friend who's like, done something, wronged you in some way, what's an appropriate way to like deal with that? And like simple things like that, like little simple strategies, nothing like earth shaking or anything groundbreaking or anything like that. And then we have what we call tier two, which are kids who, tier one isn't quite enough, right? We give them that initial instruction. They might get some of it, but they don't get enough of it for us to feel like they're really proficient in whatever skill we're talking about. And so we need to give them like a little bit extra. But when we're talking about like the behaviors that we're talking about, that would get a kid in the olden days kicked out of school, we would call tier three. Like they're kids that are like, it's intensive, right? And so for like a kid who's a tier three kid in reading, they're probably 3 to 4 grade levels behind where they should be. So you're talking about like a fourth grader who just flat out can't read or is still sounding out words or whatever it might be. And then for like behavior, it's kids who like might melt down and completely, they might destroy a classroom. They might run out of the classroom. They might try to run from the school. They might,
Do some sort of self-harm.
right, self-harm or, hurt others or just like scream and it inconsolably and things like that. And so I'm not sure we found, I'm not aware of people who have found like anything that has really been like a game changer in terms of addressing those kind of behaviors. I mean, most of those kind of behaviors will oftentimes also be, there's a high likelihood that those might also be some sort of, disability that kids might have, like an emotional disability, or it might be a manifestation of a learning disability and frustration from that. And so that's where you get into like the special education side of things, where you have specially trained teachers to who specialize in figuring that stuff out. And it goes beyond just what a regular classroom teacher is going to be able to to do, but we're asking them more and more to do more of that stuff. And so like when you think about say a third grade teacher right now, they've got to teach reading, they've got to teach, and when I say reading, they've got to teach them how to read, because some of the kids they get walking into their third grade classroom still don't know how to read. So they've got to teach them phonics and phonemic awareness and all those kinds of things. But then on top of that, they also have to teach them how to comprehend what they read, which includes vocabulary and language comprehension, as well as like how to take what you're reading and make inferences and connections and things. That's all just reading. That third grade teacher also has to teach them math, and some of those kids, those third grade kids need all the way back to counting and basic addition operations. Some of them are ready to multiply and divide, right when they walk in. And then you also got social studies and science, and then health is on the classroom teacher in the elementary school. It's not on the PE teacher like it is in the high schools. And then we talked about you have those additional things now too, of teaching them social emotional skills, teaching them, third grade's too young for sex education, but you get up into like fifth grade. Now they're also responsible for being part of the sex education talks that happen within the school at that grade level. And so it's just, we went from our whole goal is just to teach kids how to read to now we have all this other stuff. And that's just the teaching side of things.
Mm-hmm.
We're also now feeding kids 2 out of their 3 meals
Yep.
a day. We're we're with them longer oftentimes than their waking hours wise than they are with their actual families and stuff. And so in some ways, and I do think that there are probably some parents out there who view it this way, is that like the school is raising the kid
Mm-hmm.
versus the school being there to educate the kid, where kids are getting the what you would call raised at home.
Mm-hmm.
And that line is not so clear anymore, I don't
Yeah.
think.
Yep. It's less and less clear.
And the fact of the matter is that like it comes out of necessity, right? Like you don't control what comes to you as a teacher, right? You don't control who those 16, 20, 24, sometimes 32 kids that walk into your door, you don't know, you don't have any control over what those kids bring in. Sometimes they're going to bring in, they're going to be third graders who already know how to multiply and divide and can read 150 words per minute and, can comprehend at a really high level. And some of them might walk in you might get a kid who walks in who's never been to school before. And they're walking in third grade because they are of third grade age, and you can't put that kid in kindergarten with 5-year-olds when they're, already 5'2" or whatever.
Yeah.
And just socially, that is problematic too. Like you can't put him with 5-year-olds that will do irreparable harm to that kid's self-esteem and self-image and all of that. And so there's a really good I can't remember. I wish I could tell you who said it, but it just came to me here where they're talking about like they at an education conference they bring in, the guy from, I believe it's Blue Bell ice cream, and he's there to like talk to them about, we're really successful, we make the very best ice cream, and like he has all this stuff that like these are the things we should do, how you can improve like public education if you run it this way and this way. And like, and then a teacher stands up and asks him, I bet when you make your blueberry ice cream, you probably use the very best blueberries there are. He's like, oh yes, so you only use like top ingredients, and you probably the cream and stuff that you get probably you probably source that out from a pretty good source too. Oh yes, we have the best bet. And then she says, we don't get that luxury, right? We get what we get when kids walk in the door. And we have to do the very best we can with the group that's in front of us. And you know, and I will say one of the very best things that public school teachers do is they love their kids. Even teachers that have rubbed me the wrong way and I'm not sure how effective they are, instructionally. I've met very few teachers who I can tell you don't love the kids that walk in their room. And the fact of the matter is if you don't love the kids that walk in your room, you don't last very long because that's a lot to do. That's a lot to put up with and a lot of stress to put on yourself to be with a bunch of kids that you don't enjoy. And so, but that is the honest truth about it is like when you just got to take what you get from the kids that you get and figure out how to maximize their abilities and get them to learn the very most you can get them to learn in the 1 year that you have them it's I don't know. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, it's a miracle that we still, with all the added responsibilities we've lumped onto teachers, that we still are churning out, a population that is as literate as it is. Like our scores are not great nationally, but we're competing against, places where they are much more focused on on reading and writing and math and very little else, right? And I don't like some of the schools we're talking about, and like Singapore is a pretty big, they're one of the ones for math that usually have pretty good scores. But I could be wrong, but I can't imagine Singapore has all of these things that they're doing like we're trying to
All
do
these
for our
additional
kids.
supports
Mhm.
for all the other hierarchy of needs that a child
Yep.
has.
And the fact of the matter is like when you don't know what's going to come, you have to just be prepared for any of it. And so you have to be prepared. Like if kids aren't going to come in knowing how to talk to each other in a polite and appropriate way, you can either just be mad about it or you can teach them how to do it. And teachers are 100% of the time are going to teach them how to do it. And you know, we talk about a lot of times we in education, you'll hear people talk about kids' home lives or whether they're showing up at school or what happened to them in the past. And um, we have a saying that we say a lot of we want to focus on what we can control. You can't control what happens to them once they leave here. But if we know that they have suffered some trauma and need some support for that, we can control that. We can get them some counseling services, or we can get them, a mentor to work with. And, but all of these things that we're doing, there's not infinite time in the school day. The school day is the same length it's always been. And so when you are adding all these things onto it, what happens? You have less time devoted
Yeah.
to those things that we used to have 100% of the time devoted to.
Right.
And so, of course, you're going to see a little regression in those other areas. And that's where I think as a profession, we're trying to figure out, because one thing we are doing better now is we're figuring out what works and what doesn't work a lot better than we did in the past. Like in the past, I think, teachers were kind of left to their own devices and some were highly, highly effective and they were really self-reflective and figured out good strategies that really achieved good results. And some people taught the way they did because they like to teach it that way, but it may not have achieved very good results. And then you get 30 years of that
Of that
that
little
teacher doing it every
microsystem.
single, yeah. And we are a little bit better in that we've kind of just as a profession have identified better strategies for teaching that I think when done properly, can kind of make up for the lack of time that we have to teach these skills. If we can be, hyper efficient with the time that we have the students in front of us, that we can maybe achieve similar or even better results than we have in the past, just because we're doing it in a better way.
And that's really your job, is that better way is the more organized and
Yeah, it's part of it for sure.
panoramic view of the education for the child.
Yeah, and kind of where my job comes in big time is figuring out like those kids who are really far behind,
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out putting systems in place to figure out who they are, what their deficits are, what kind of resources do we have that will efficiently help them close the gaps on the skills that they need. And then on top of that, make sure that it's actually closing the gap. Because I think that's where, for a lot of schools, it falls apart. Like they get the kids identified, they have, interventions to put the kids in, and have the kids in those interventions. But if it's not the right fit for that kid, they could just be, wasting a whole school year doing this reading intervention that makes no difference to them because it doesn't make sense for them as a learner. And so that's where, like, one of the kind of a lot of times when you talk about it, it sounds kind of like an aside, but it is one of the biggest parts, is monitoring those kids' progress and making sure they are making progress. Because if they're not, we got to try something else to make sure that we get them caught up as much as we can.
Okay, so your job involves a lot of individual attention paid to the performance of individual students.
Yeah.
Interesting.
As well as like looking at the system as a whole. And so then we'll look at, school-wide data and see, like, we know, these kids that we have in these groups are progressing well. How's the school doing as a whole? Like, are we seeing that then translate to school-wide growth or class-wide growth or grade level-wide growth? And yeah, and it's a lot. There's a lot of moving parts.
There's a lot of
And it's
moving parts
human beings that you're trying to take,
to form.
evidence-based practices and apply them onto humans who are completely imperfect. And what works, wonders for one kid may completely screw up another kid, and he regresses.
Sure.
And you can't have a year of a kid regressing. Like, 6 weeks, enough time so we see, yes, they are for sure not responding to this intervention. We're not just jumping the gun after like a week or two, but like giving it proper time for them to, they should have seen some growth by now. Oh, they didn't. Okay, now we need to try something else. And we do have, we do have some kids who, I've been there, this is my third year there, and we have, a handful of kids who we're still trying to find the thing that's going to get them to move. We've tried multiple different things. Now, granted, most of the kids that I'm talking about are kids who are identified as learning disabled. So it's going to be even more difficult to get them moving. And it's only, a handful of kids in the entire school. But like, those are the kids that I think about all the time. Like, how the heck can we get this kid to move? Like, we've got a ton of kids who are making great growth, huge movement. When I started there, right before I got hired, the winter before I got hired, we had like something like 8% of our kids reading above benchmark in just the act of reading, like being able to read a passage.
Mm-hmm.
And this fall we had 43%. And so just in that 2 years, because it really only been 2 years, this is into my third year, just in 2 years, we'd made, a 35% increase in kids who are reading above grade level, which is huge growth. But 35 is still not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get that number to 60 to 80 to really make sure that when they're in the classroom, they've got the skills to be able to get the most out of their classroom instruction too. Because that classroom instruction is written for kids who are, third graders who are on third grade level. So if they're a third grader on a second grade level, they're not going to get all there is to get from that curriculum because they don't have all the prerequisite skills they need to access the content. And so, yeah, it's a complicated web of
Yeah,
things.
yes, it is. And because I come from such a different background, I'm afraid that my questions may come across as coming from a critical place.
Yeah.
But I am really trying to understand. Um, are schools and particularly teachers, are they just being asked to do and oversee too much?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I don't think you'd have a teacher out there who would say, no, this is an appropriate workload for what we do. And the amount of teacher burnout and attrition is through the roof right now. Like it is. I can't remember. There were some numbers for the state of Wyoming that were like staggering the amount of teachers who had left the profession. And in fact,
Now it's the teachers who are getting kicked out. They're kicking themselves out.
because it's it's a pretty thankless job now. Like it didn't used to be. In fact, even when I started, I felt like I had a lot of, support from parents and members of the community, and like more and more, you see, hyper it's this hyper criticism of education for all sorts of different reasons, whether it be test scores or what they're teaching the kids, what they're not teaching the kids, what, talks about indoctrination of students and things like that, and lots of different things coming from all different angles, from all different types of groups and people that have very little understanding of what happens in a school. And
Well, that's sort of my fear, to be honest, is again, coming from the background I have, I think I took like driver's ed at my local public school.
right,
Shout out to Corey Coffee, my driver's ed teacher. He was great.
right,
We had the whole class honestly had a great time. But this was also A, 20 years ago,
yeah,
and B, a fraction of the experience that even just your average kid has
yeah.
on my part. But nonetheless, shout out to Corey Coffee. He was yeah, driver's ed in the class, and then we would geek out about Star Wars after.
Nice.
So, yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand what is actually happening.
Yeah.
If you were God, right, where would you try to unwind some of what a teacher has to do? Assuming we can find someone else to do it. Like, what would you try to take
Right.
off their plate?
I mean, I think to be honest with you, I think like the thing that, like you're saying, if I was God,
Yeah.
like that's really the only way we could get to the solution I'm about to propose to you, because there's an entire problem with the way our society as a whole just views education and the profession of elementary to high school education, and yeah, I'm sure college in some ways too, but I'm not in that world, so I can't tell you for sure. But I mean, it's not a very well respected profession. It's been that way for a while. It's for a lot of people that I remember going to college with. It was either not the majority. I want to be clear on that, but there were a lot of people who this was either their backup degree because the degree they initially went there for was too difficult, or it's seen as an easy degree to get. You know what I mean? Especially elementary education, which is funny because you get in there and elementary education is incredibly hard to teach. I told you all the things you have to teach, and then like you think about like a high school teacher. High school has its own completely different set of problems as you're dealing with kids going through adolescence. But when you're a high school science teacher, or Ryan will tell you, high school English teacher, he teaches essentially the same class 3 times a day, and then maybe another class another 2 or 3 times a day. He's probably prepping for, in terms of content wise, maybe three
Two
to
to
four
three
actual
okay.
like differing content. Now he's probably also like thinking about the kids in each class, and now he's got to differentiate for those kids in each class, but it's all still the same subject, essentially the same set of standards that he's kind of operating on. Versus elementary education, you're working on your reading, you're reading foundational standards, you're reading literature standards, you're reading informational standards, your math standards, which have a bunch of subdomains, your science standards, your social studies standards, your health standards. When I was teaching kindergarten in Cheyenne, we also had to teach Spanish language
Yeah.
for at least once a week. And then you have all this other stuff like, and we haven't even gotten into that. Like these teachers are also in a lot of schools, ours included, running academic interventions, which then now they're prepping for a small group of kids to try to help them close the gap. Because when we intervene and give supports to our kids, and we pull them for like a small reading intervention group, a lot of times we're using the classroom teachers to be the person running those groups along with some of our other support staff, paraprofessionals and things like that. And so it's a lot. And those people who went, to be clear too, most of those people who I went to college with that were in there for it to be an easy degree, they're not teaching anymore. Like maybe if they made it, first off, they would have had to pass the praxis. So there is a test in Wyoming that you have to pass to be certified as an educator. And I know more people than I'd care to admit who could not pass that thing. And it's not hard. It's not hard. It's like it has some hard pieces to it. Do you know what a diphthong is?
A diphthong?
Diphthong.
A diphthong.
Mm-hmm.
That's a certain consonant combination.
It is.
Correct?
Good work, Jonathan. Nice. Look at you. You didn't though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
That was one of
is
that was one of the
NP,
ones
like
that I
int,
remember.
like at the end of Gant.
A diphthong.
Is that a diphthong?
A diphthong is two consonants that create a new sound.
Okay.
So you're talking like TH,
Mm.
SH, CH.
Mhm.
Like they're not. You have consonants that are blends, so like BR. You hear the B sound, you hear the R sound, you just blend them together. It's burr, right?
Yeah.
Or like NG is an example. I think NG is kind of a little bit of a hazy area where it's like you kind of hear both sounds, you kind of don't. So I think some programs will classify that sound as a diphthong. Some will classify it as a blend. But yeah, diphthongs are when two consonants come together and make a completely new sound. That was the hardest question I remember from when I took the praxis was that question right there. And like you're not in education, you don't teach reading, you don't like you still had it somewhere in there. You probably, from the multiple choice options that you were given, you probably would have been able to suss out
Sure.
what it is. Like it's not a wildly difficult test.
Yep.
But I do think it is, from my experience of seeing who has not passed it, it at least kept those people out in front of from getting in front of kids and trying to teach them, how to cross
at least a
multiply
buffer,
fractions, or these things that like a lot of us may not even remember how to do. Like I remember when we took our elementary ed math class, it was literally just elementary educate like math. It was literally just like kindergarten through fifth grade math. But there's stuff in there that like you haven't used since you were a fifth grader.
Yep.
And you have to relearn. And some of those people didn't learn it the first time. And like I said, I don't know of any of those people that I'm talking about that ever were in front of kids for too long. And so that's good. But we're struggling as a profession right now. Like there's a really good podcast out there by a kid I went to high school with actually in Cheyenne. It's called Those Who Can't Teach Anymore. And it's about people who have left because who were great teachers, loved what they did. Kids loved them, parents loved them, administrators loved them. They got good results and they just couldn't do it anymore. It was too much. And there's a variety of reasons. You'll hear things around like across the board from, issues with parents, issues with colleagues, issues with just like the way that but I think the kind of a overarching one is just the way the profession as a whole is just not respected.
Not respected.
And you don't get, very rarely do you see, the best and brightest kids being pushed into education, you know?
Oh no.
You got your valedictorians aren't being pushed to be teachers. They're being pushed to be doctors and lawyers and,
Or go work
these
for
more
go work for
respected.
Silicon Valley
Well, I
or
mean, those are the real smart ones.
right.
That's
Go
where they're
makes me
going.
some money. Yeah.
Go where you're providing really very little, you know, actual value to our society, but you can make a crap ton of money,
Come
right?
on,
Can
man.
you find a good
Someone's got
app,
to design the new button on the iPhone 16.
right? What would we
We
do?
needed
What
that.
would we do without it? Or the 10th, variation of AI
Hmm.
that's going to come out, right? We got Apple Intelligence. You got,
Hmm.
what is the Twitter one? Grok or something
Is
like
that yeah?
that.
Nah.
Chat GPT.
Is
Grok
that the
is
Twitter? That okay? That's Elon Musk's is
Yeah.
doing the Grok.
Meta
That's
has
a
their own, like
yeah,
they all have their own AI now.
yeah, yeah.
And so we got to have somebody come up with, the 12th one
The
and the
12th
13th one.
iteration.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I really should just call it PA, predictive analytics.
Right.
It really isn't
Mhm.
AI.
Who were we talking about this with?
What was that?
Was it with Brian? We were talking about like, or was it with?
Oh, I think it was Preble.
Was it Preble? Yes, it was with Preble. We were talking about no one would be alarmed about AI if we had just talked
Called it.
if we had talked it about large language algorithms.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone would be like, okay, yeah, large language algorithms. Cool. Yeah.
Be a lot less people use
Yeah,
it
look at
too,
the
though.
look at the six-fingered people they
Right.
draw.
3 arms.
Yeah, three arms. Really
It
vague.
looks like someone melted her face.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it'll get better, right? It'll get better. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's
Uh,
only going to get it will give you what gets fed into it,
sure.
right? And
Sure.
like I think the interesting thing about it is I really wonder how long until people start figuring out how to game it, right? Because it's just pulling stuff from the internet.
Sure.
It's all it's doing.
Yeah.
It's just searching the internet and pulling stuff. So how long till somebody figures out, if we put out 1,000 websites that all say this about this,
Hmm.
that we can then trick the AI
Into
into thinking that that is
into
true.
harvesting that information
Right.
first.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean? Because that's all it's doing. It's just out there searching around. It's just a really good Google search, is basically mostly what it is.
Toads have four eyes, right? And if you can get that to iterate
Right.
80 billion times in
Yeah,
a
if you can
search.
if you can just figure out how to get more instances of that,
Yeah.
then toads have 2 eyes
Yeah.
out there.
Yep.
And then, there's places out there that have got enough people to at what point do China and Russia figure out that like it's not worth their time trolling
Uh-huh.
on Twitter and these other websites? Instead, we need to use our bot farms to create, thousands of websites that just say this about
Right. And then
to
people will use AI to go get the information.
right.
They
And
think
now
they're
they're
out go
pulling.
getting it themselves.
Right.
And now it's,
Hmm.
ooh, that is scary. Okay. So if you were God, right, you would change the public perception of education.
Correct. Yeah.
So that it was more widely respected and then also was recruiting top talent.
Right. Well, I think those two things go hand in hand. Like if we respect it as a profession and as a real viable you know career path for some of our best and brightest kids as they're coming out, like I think that would change a lot. Like you would get one, just that respect. Like you would never hear. I mean, there are some crazy people out there, I'm sure, who do talk to their doctors the way that many, parents and things like that will sometimes talk to their teachers and principals. But
Mm.
I bet that number is a whole lot lower when you're talking about whether they trust their doctor's opinion versus whether they trust what we're telling them about their student.
A lot of people ignore their doctor, but in their heart of hearts, they wish they weren't ignoring their doctor.
Right.
A lot of people ignore their teacher because they're convinced they know better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I don't need to take away my kid's video game system and make him read more. Like he There's text on screen. He'll learn to read.
Right.
There's text on screen, Pat.
Yeah, there is. Somebody was telling me today that one of the kids had told them that like they asked them if they read at home and they said, "Well, I read on TikTok because sometimes, they have words on them." So, okay, well, I guess that's better than not reading at all, but very marginally better.
Very marginally. Mm-hmm.
And and I think with if we could, I don't know how we do it, like outside of being God,
Being God, yeah.
but
Yeah.
like if it just the respect for the profession, then all of a sudden you have, you know, more, brighter minds going into it in the first place. You have, you know, people trusting their opinions and and the things they say. And when they ask you to, read 20 minutes at home with your kid every night, they might actually do it.
Mm.
You then are going to get to the point where like we value that. We value our teachers' opinions of our kids. And so we want them to be, we want them to go into school
Mhm.
with some skills and be able to, but like right now, like we have a whole slew of parents out there who it's the school's job to teach them how to read. It's the school's job to teach them it's their school's job to take care of the fact that they were bullying at home last night. They weren't even at school, but because it's between two students, the school needs to deal with it now.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
that's the level we've gotten to
Yeah.
with some of this is that like it's not just it goes beyond the school walls now even.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
it's just it's one of those things I don't know how we come back from as like a society. Like how do we slow the direction we're going? That would be great. It'd be even better if we could stop. Maybe
Wind it
this is the
back.
worst it will get in terms of like the amount we heap onto public education and the amount of, scrutiny it it should be scrutinized. Everything should be scrutinized. But the amount of like over scrutiny of things that people have no understanding of pieces of it, and the lack of trust and the lack of respect for the like I think that goes back to the lack of respect for the profession, right? Like I don't think you do have people who question doctors and their intentions and things like that with, diagnoses and whatnot. But we have this level of it with that somehow there's nefarious things going on within our public schools. And I can tell you there is no time in the day for teachers to be doing any sort of nefarious things with those kids throughout the day. They are wall to wall with trying to just fit in their reading instruction, trying to fit in their math instruction. They've got to get them to specials on time so they can go to art, music, and PE and do all those kinds of things. So they're well-rounded kids, and we value, the creative side of our kids and not just the purely academic side. And yeah, and I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing there's just it's just a little more widespread. People thinking they know better than the people who went to school to learn how to teach kids. That there's a lot of people who just think, well, I mean, I went to school. This is how we did it when I went to school, and somehow that's your qualifier for being some sort of expert on how it should go. You know.
Mm.
It's like if somebody walks into the gym and it's like, I watched some UFC fights. I know how to do this move better than you guys know how to teach it and the way you're teaching it to your students in here. Or I got submitted by an armbar one time, so I know how I should
And I
teach the
thought about
armbar.
it. Right.
Right.
Right. I thought about it. So.
Yeah.
Uh, huh.
Yeah, it's not easy, man.
No.
It's not a great profession to be in right now, to be like quite frank with you. Like I think every teacher right now, if they were being honest with themselves, would tell you that there's probably something that could happen in the next 6 to 12 months that they would probably leave. Like it, depending on how, some of them are, you have the ones, who are probably lifers in it, but like it's just we're on like a knife's edge with it. And you see things like there's legislation right now trying to make it so that you don't have to even have a certification to teach. Going through the Wyoming, it's a bill, House Bill 100 is what it's called right now. And it's in the legislature right now being voted on sometime in the next few weeks that would eliminate the need for certification for people to teach. The only qualifier they have in there is that you are 18 years old and pass a background check. And so you could walk right out of your high school and then immediately walk back in to go teach high school science as long as you pass the background check.
Same qualifications for owning a gun.
Yep. And yeah. And it's that kind of stuff that makes it really hard to feel valued as a profession. And you'll hear people talk about like why they put it in there that way. Like there is a teacher shortage for sure, and it's only going to get worse, but that's not solving the problem. Now you're just going to have unqualified people who go teach and then give up on teaching 3 to 5 years in. It's not going to they're not going to stay any more than the current teachers are staying. And they'll probably stay less because they don't have the same investment into the profession that someone who went to 4 years of college, did their student teaching and had to work their butt off to get a job has in it.
Sure.
And yeah, that kind of stuff is terrifying of like, it makes me really worried.
Like one of the best ways to make something more attractive is to make it harder.
Right.
So like that, like when we're talking about, BJJ and other things, the reason why so many people are interested in it is because it requires such a long time to actually master something.
Right.
And so when you take away that excellence out of it, there's no real attractiveness of why you should do it. I think that's why lawyers are always like people aspire to be lawyers because it's so hard to become one.
Right.
But the lawyer schools are packed,
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be a lawyer.
Yep. Yeah, my sister's a lawyer. My mom wanted me to be a lawyer. My mom tried real hard to talk me out of being a teacher. So she actually was a speech pathologist in Jeffrey City for 1 year, right in the middle of one of the booms in Jeffrey City. And she was there for 1 year and could not do it anymore. And her main reason it was not a ghost town. It was booming at that time, but it was still Jeffrey City. So it was still quite small. And so she was teacher or speech pathologist and cheerleading coach. And I can't remember what else she did, but I remember she tells me, she's told this story many, many times, but like what got her was those girls she had these really intelligent girls on the cheerleading team that could have done anything. And their entire aspiration was to marry one of the dudes at the school who would then go work in the mine, and that would be it.
That was their life
That was
vision.
That was all they aspired to, and she couldn't do it. And she 1 year put in her notice like halfway through the spring, and
it's like I'm part of a system that just creates limits in people's minds.
Right. Yeah. And now it's not even a town anymore. So that dream.
Where did that dream go?
Maybe there's a few of them and still they're living that dream.
Somewhere up in the hills.
I don't think it went the way they thought it was going to go.
Pulling lithium ion.
Right.
No, it's not
uranium.
Uranium. That's right.
Yep.
Pulling that uranium.
Yeah. But she tried to talk me out of going into teaching. So I had a super good experience as a like older elementary into early middle school kid with doing these summer camps through the YMCA in Cheyenne. It was an incredible experience. Like we were in like this like perfect time where they had like boomed into where they had like 4 different camps throughout the city that we would all come together sometimes, and we'd do like we'd play capture the flag against each other, and we had these different rival camps and stuff. And it was this awesome experience. And so I went to work for the YMCA, right, as soon as I turned 16. And I've worked with kids ever since. That's all I've done. And I remember when it was time to I was going off to college, and I went in I was going to go in as an elementary ed major, and my mom talked me out of it. And she was like, "You'll have kids of your own. Like I know you think you want to work with kids all your whole life, but you'll have kids of your own." And like the, she didn't say it, but I think she felt like we said it, you're wasting
You're throwing
my
your
talent or my
ability
intelligence
away.
or my whatever doing this profession that isn't a respected profession. And to her credit, I think she was also, it's hard. It's a hard profession, and you get attached to kids and they leave, or tragedy happens to them. Like Candace just a couple of years ago had a student she had who was killed in a gun accident in Cheyenne. And um, I had a former student who died in a car crash in Cheyenne just like about a year and a half ago. And like it's not that kind of stuff that sticks with you. But it is hard. And it's hard for a myriad of reasons. And she wanted me to go into business. And so I did start my freshman year of college as a business major. And then by halfway through, or no, I started my freshman year as an elementary ed major. She convinced me to switch to business at semester. And then I came back and I worked at the Y for the summer again. And I was like, no, I can't. Like I want to be around kids and
This is
doing
too
stuff
much
with
of
kids.
what I want.
And so I went back and switched back and haven't ever looked back. But I think my life would be a lot easier if had been a business major. I'd have a lot less of like, there's a different kind of stress when you're a teacher. Like
Just be the
it's an
general manager for
emotional
Walmart,
stress.
make 300K a year.
Right. That'd be great.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Just worry about the shoplifters.
Right.
Making sure there's enough flat
Hitting
screens
our
in.
quotas or whatever.
Yeah, making sure there's
Yeah.
enough flat screens for people to come and buy the flat screens.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those people are making, six figures, and then it takes you 20, 30 years in education to ever even approach that number.
Right.
And those are the people giving all of our populace the skills that they're supposed to need
Yeah.
to go out into the workforce. It's a really interesting thing.
Oh, it's really weird. Yeah, it's really weird. Why? Yeah, what troubles me, if I were to articulate it, it seems that we as a nation are not paying attention to our own offspring, our own legacy, that we don't want to invest the money. Like, why can't we pay teachers like 160 a year?
Right.
That's not even that crazy, but that's like,
But then you'd have to up taxes.
you have to, yeah, that's fair. That's true. But what is the cost what is the
what
cost
would
to
be the
us
gain, right? What would be the gain? It'd be interesting to know. I don't think anybody's done that on a large enough scale to have studied like what the like economic and societal impacts that might have to invest more in education like that. But you can look at countries who have, more well-respected education systems like Japan, like Finland, that really do put very high esteem into their teachers, and it is a profession that people go into, you know, as like a truly desired profession, not as a backup because they flunked out of engineering school at UW or something like that, or their moms tried to talk them out of it because they didn't want them to experience the same thing they experienced. And it would be interesting to know what kind of impact that would have on a community.
Would our taxes towards the prison system go down because there are less kids there are less kids exiting the school system in a really bad way and therefore ending up in prison?
Well, they
I don't know. I don't know if that would balance out.
They look at test scores in elementary school from for kids to kind of project out prison construction.
Uh-huh.
And so I'd heard at one point that it was like they look at third grade reading scores to figure out how many
Prisons
prisons
they should build.
and cells and stuff they will potentially need. But and I'd also had heard that like they do look at early education scores,
Hmm.
but it's not just like third grade reading scores, is what I've heard is that's one of those like half true. Snopes would call it like partially true or whatever.
Right. It's a pithy way to put it,
Right.
but it
But
is a more in-depth
it's
analysis than
much more concise and like to the point to say it that way of like they look at third grade reading scores to project how to build prisons, how many prisons to build. That hits a little harder than like explaining the nuance of what they
right.
probably actually
There's a
do.
team of
But there
analysts
is,
who
they have
gather
found some
educational
sort of
data,
correlation
blah, 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 blah.
they found some sort of correlation between, you know, elementary school level testing
Mhm.
and prison
And
prison rates
yeah,
and incarceration rates. And so you're probably 100% true that I think based on that, we could probably make the assumption that if we had a better education system through, and we're also assuming that paying 160,000 would then lead to a better education system. I think
I think it would
it
attract
probably would.
it would attract some ambitious people. It would
Right.
frankly, it would keep some people in that might otherwise get out.
Hmm.
There might be someone who says, I don't mind the stress, I don't mind the work, but for the same amount of stress and the same amount of work, I can go make twice as much,
Yeah.
right? So they might be just saying, I don't mind the fact that this is a high pressure job. It's just I could go do a high pressure job and actually get a decent vacation.
Right. And it's a different kind of pressure too. Like I'm sure that like cops and like firefighters and stuff, like Dominic even talked a little bit about this. Like you take some of that home with you,
Mm-hmm.
and how I remember him saying like you have to have this mindset of like I have to be able to just let it go, right? Like when I drop them off at the hospital, I have to be able to just forget they existed,
Yep.
right? But you can't as a school teacher. Like you can't because you're gonna see that kid tomorrow and the next day. And then you're gonna see if I had him in kindergarten, I'll see him for the next 6 years till he leaves the elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're probably also gonna then get their high school graduation invite
Yep.
as they graduate high school. And it's you can't do that in education. And part of what makes I think teachers really special is that like they to be a good teacher, you have to be able to build good relationships with your kids, and they have to be real relationships too, because kids know when you're not being genuine and sincere with them, and you take that emotional weight home of like you're frustrated with, you know, how a lesson went or an interaction you had with a kid or something you learned about a student or a former student. And it's a whole different level of like tired. Like I remember I was teaching, I graduated. Candace still had 2 years left. She was working, waiting tables and bartending while she was going to school. And like she would put in like real long hours sometimes and she would come home and she would be super worn out and tired and whatnot. And like I remember that first year that I taught kindergarten being coming home almost every single day and just like crashing on the couch, being just like exhausted. And she was like, gave me all kinds of crap for it. And then she became a teacher
Uh-huh.
and she came home. I remember that first week of school that she came home and she was like, I've never been this tired. And it's not a physical tired, it's like a mental and emotional
Yep.
like drain. Like they say you like teachers make more decisions in a day than like pretty much any other profession, like heart surgeons, like neurosurgeons, like rocket scientists, like these ones you would think are like these high, like, but teachers make more decisions in a single day than any of those professions. And that's mentally
Very
draining on
taxing.
you.
Yep.
And then you add the emotional side of it too, and physical too. You're up on your feet all day, you're walking
Sure.
around, you're up and down, you're on the floor, you're over here. But
Yeah.
it's not really the physical that gets people, it's the mental and emotional.
Yeah, a job where you have those gentle movements is probably overall fairly good for your health,
Yeah.
right? If you're moving around. Yeah, carrying cement bags up staircases probably is not
No.
great for you. But yeah, up and down, moving around, walking, that's probably not terrible.
Yeah.
So, man, that's a lot to think about. We are unfortunately out of time, but man, we're just gonna have to have you back on so we can
Yeah.
Yeah,
continue.
man.
We didn't even get to like some of the charter school questions and
Yeah.
homeschool questions, but
Yeah.
yeah, so we'll just have to have you back and pick your brain some more.
Yeah, I'd love to come back, man.
Yeah,
This is fun.
Yeah. Oh man, it's a blast. Yeah. Yeah, this was great. Well, Pat, thank you for being here on the Green Dragon. We really enjoyed the conversation. We'll catch you next time around.
Yeah, thanks, man. And those of you who are out there, go thank your teacher, whether it's your kid's teacher or your favorite teacher that you grew up with, or the one you hated. 'Cause they still showed up every
tried.
day and they still taught you, even though you hated them. All right.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect.